Welcome to Exposure. I'm Jill Hunkler, a mother, seventh-generation Ohio Valley resident, a community advocate, and founder of Ohio Valley Allies. Join us as we reveal the hidden costs of the oil and gas, petrochemical, and plastic industries.
And I'm Stuart Day, a small business owner, father, and organic farmer from Western Pennsylvania. In each episode, we will dive into the shocking and often hidden impacts these industries have on our communities, our health, our environment, and our way of life.
We will speak with experts and people living on the front lines to better understand the issues and explore the solutions that will shift us away from these toxic industries. As I find myself here in this beginning moment of exposure, let me be real with you. I have been resisting sharing the truth and harsh realities of living on the front lines of oil and gas, petrochemical, and plastic development, even though I've been doing so for over a decade. There's this internal struggle going on, and this thought keeps appearing. I want to uplift, motivate, and strengthen people, not drag them down. In an effort to find peace with sharing such blistering truths, I must also share wisdom that I have found along my journey that supports me. Wisdom like this. Understanding is not knowing the kind of facts that your books and teachers talk about. Understanding begins with respect. All people and all things have their own will, their own way, their own purpose, and this is what is to be respected. Such respect is not a feeling or an attitude only. It's a way of life. Such respect means we never stop realizing and never neglect to carry out our obligations to ourselves, our children, and the environment.
Jill, we can relate on many levels and share a common truth based on our lived experience with the negative impact of fracking operations near my home and organic farm and your home that you built with your own hands. And on that note, I'd like to start by asking folks to imagine your dream home, whatever that looks like for you. You made it, you built the home yourself, you find peace and solace there. You are connected to it. It's not just a house, but it's your place in this big world. Then one day, a series of events outside of your control begins. We aren't talking about events outside of human control like a hurricane or flood, but events that are directly attached to an industry that is funded in part by your tax dollars. And those events force you from your home. You become a refugee from your home because of the health impacts this industry has had on you and your home. And that's the story that we're going to hear today from our host, Jill Hunkler. So, Jill, tell us the story about how all of this started for you. How did we end up sitting in these seats today?
Well, I can tell you that one of my earliest memories is driving through my small town. It's a village, actually, Barnesville, Ohio, with my sister. And we notice in front of us, there's a truck with Halliburton written on the side. And I looked at her and I said, you know you're in trouble when you see a Halliburton truck arrive in your small town. And then, you started seeing more and more industry traffic, and I'd be driving around these beautiful country roads that I've been cruising my whole life. And suddenly, a beautiful hillside that I'd loved and enjoyed and been habitat to many creatures forever is being hauled away one truckload at a time after cutting down all the beautiful trees. And so first I saw that evidence of like what it did to the landscape, how unsafe it made the roadways. But then, the leasing agent started knocking on my door and asking me to lease, which I never did. But I just decided I had to find out a little bit more about it, what was going on. And the fact that they use our precious freshwater drinking supplies, mix it with chemicals, and inject it at high pressure underground. That's all I needed to know. It's not a good idea. That was it. I could have never found out about the radioactivity or the emissions that are coming off these facilities that includes, volatile organic compounds, cancer causing chemicals. So yeah, I mean, immediately I was like, no way, this can't be happening. This shouldn't be happening. And I decided I had to try to do anything I could to educate myself more and then educate my family, my friends, my community, to how toxic this industry really, really is.
If we go back to kind of before the fracking started in your area, tell me about your house, your home, your land. Like, you grew up in this community, in and around Barnesville, Ohio. You're seventh generation, and your home was something really special to you.
Barnesville has always kind of been my home base, but I was fortunate enough to live in some other amazing places when I was a child, going back and forth between my mother and father. So I lived in places like the Grand Teton National Park, Santa Cruz, California, Flagstaff, Arizona. And so I had experienced life in other places, but as an adult, after traveling, throughout this country and abroad, I decided this is where I wanted to be and to build my home because of the simplicity of my roots, my heritage. And I grew up with my father on one shore of Slope Creek Reservoir, which was historically pristine. It's the headwaters of Captina Creek watershed, which is one of the most pristine in the state. So I had this beautiful reservoir that provided so much enjoyment and solitude, really. I mean, it was a place that I could go and immerse myself in nature without many folks around, which is something that I thrive on and enjoy. And so slowly over several years, I I built my property with the help of family and friends. But the first year, I lived in an Airstream camper even through the winter. Um, and then built the kitchen and the bathroom and had a little tiny, hallway where the bunk beds were that my daughter and I used to sleep in, had the little cook stove in the middle. And then I managed as a single mother to I got a $9,000 loan and used recycled materials from a house that my family members had torn down. And we built a living room and two bedrooms. But, it was years and years of slowly, as I could save the money, improving and building the property. And the other reason why I chose it is because for years, as a youth, really, I decided that I have Quaker heritage and also Indigenous heritage, and I began dedicating my life to ancient knowledge and traditions and ceremony and learning the Indigenous cultures of the world, and an attempt to live the best life I could in balance and harmony with nature. And so my place was also a sanctuary where folks from all over would come, especially from the cities, and be able to experience solitude and the truth and the power of ceremony and kind of connecting with nature. I can't remember which reporter this was, but someone from DC came, a journalist from a major publication, and came to my property and got out, and he's like, "This is idyllic." He
Hmm.
was just like, oh, wow. I mean, people and other folks get out. I feel so much better as soon as I get here. So there was a vibe and energy about the place that was healing just by it alone, without the fact,
The
just
natural
yeah,
landscape. Yeah.
yeah. So it was really difficult to leave, literally 4 years of I had a push mower. I had to push mow 3 acres. I couldn't garden anymore. My strawberry patch was gone. I just would go down occasionally to mow and check on the place. And I was still, once a month having ceremony. But instead of please come and enjoy the pristine air and water and this tranquil place to, you might show up and they're going to be fracking on the hill and the air pollution is going to be terrible and we might get sick and we might have to leave.
What did you know of fracking at that point?
Like I said, I didn't know what fracking was until it was literally on my doorsteps. But it didn't take much to find out. I mean, 10-minute search And to know that, they're using, like, they can use up to 16 million gallons to frack one well. They can put up to 16 or more wells on one frack pad. They put pumps on our reservoir. They were pumping water out of our reservoir, and it's permanently removed, gone, can never be cleaned. It's gone. They take it and it's destroyed. It cannot return to ever be of benefit to this planet or the human beings or the animals again. It's gone. And it's highly radioactive, filled with chemicals, all kinds of other stuff. I mean, it's not just oil and gas that comes up when they frack. It's a toxic brew, really, and then they inject it back in the ground, threatening our water supplies again, our aquifers, and the stuff migrates into old abandoned wells and comes up. I mean, it's just.
So you have this beautiful home you built with your own two hands, essentially. It's this sort of like retreat center for you and for others to come and learn about these indigenous wisdom and things that you've collected all over the world. And they start fracking by your reservoir. So how does it unfold from there?
Very rapidly. I'll say that. The pace. I mean, they can haul away a whole hillside, cut down the trees, haul away the hillside one truckload at a time, build the fracking pad like within weeks. So maybe I was on vacation or hadn't gone that way to town recently, and how did that get there? That was the feeling, like you never knew what you were going to find around the next bend as you were driving around, and so it just happened so quickly, and the white, like, Ford worker trucks everywhere, hauling the drilling rigs and the fracking rigs and the brine trucks and the sand trucks. I mean, it's still going on, all these. I mean, it's picking up again. So, I mean.
And the lights and
the noise, and, they frack at night. This happened last night. I found out it was 2 miles away, but I could, I'm like going into a panic last night because I could hear it. And I'm like, again, this is like going to be the third time now. I moved to a family property from my own that was in the country so that I can continue to do my ceremony and have a place where I felt comfortable and could thrive. Fracking came there. So I had to move into a family property in town, which I hadn't lived in town for like 15 years, And so last night, I heard it. I know it. I know what that sound is. And so I get up and drive out west of town. It was 10 o'clock at night. And first thing I noticed, the road's paved now. This used to be a dirt country road. We called it Radio Hill. That's where my mom used to take us in our Volkswagen bus more than 30 years ago, because you could get radio stations from Pittsburgh and Columbus. And we'd sit out there in the bus, and my sister Jenny and I would fall asleep in the back. And, there's this huge pad, and I probably passed 6 sand trucks. Even though the road's paved, it's still tiny. But so I just had to kind of pull off in the berm a little bit and let them pass. So anyway, yeah, I don't know where I was going with all that, though, except that it's not like a past thing, and I'm about to be a fracking refugee for the third time. How much of my sob story do I want to tell? Like, my goal is to uplift people and motivate people, and on some level, I think my story is motivating, because somehow, some way, through persistence and, I kind of have made a difference. My story has reached all over the world, really. And, but take it back to, I was forced from my home, and I had anyway, it's just all still so real. And, the reality of, like, my daughter's here visiting, today, and we hear fracking tonight. Like, am I going to just want her to say, maybe you should just go home? We shouldn't stay here. So it's all very still real to me. And the reality of, like, I have to move. I don't have the money to move, but I can't stay here because, I woke up feeling like I felt at Slope Creek this morning.
So I think that's important for people to know, is it's not like just it's not an aesthetic inconvenience.
No.
It's a health risk, right? Like what are the things that you experienced that prompted you to leave?
Well, that's happened last night. Like, I heard it. I drove to see where it was and smelled it before I got there. So yeah, I smelled it, got the headache last night, but kind of started that way with slope. I mean, eventually there were 78 fracking wells, compressor stations, one that had been in significant and ongoing violations of the Clean Air Act and the Ohio Pollution Control Act for years, with no supposed remediation, but the FLIR images that I was able to view confirmed that pollution was coming off of that facility even after they said they fixed it. So, but yeah, pipelines. I mean, I was surrounded at Slope Creek and I lived in the hollow. The volatile organic compounds, some of which are known carcinogens, are heavier than air, so they sink to the lowest point, which was my once peaceful hollow,
Mhm.
tranquil hollow. It became a toxic hollow, really. So yeah, eyes, throat, nose irritation, headaches, neck aches, body aches and pains, like so bad sometimes the pressure and for my head and my neck, like vomiting.
Well, so you were kind of forced out, and then, but you didn't go away quietly.
Yeah, it didn't stop for me there because there was just so many issues all around, building these fracking waste processing facilities next to schools, next to football fields, right in our communities, the problems with the injection wells, fracking pads being built very irresponsibly, literally right inside communities. All this open land we have here, but they'd put it right at the edge of town. People were sick, and a lot of folks don't want to make the connection. It's too hard to bear to think that, oh, well, we trust the regulators, we trust our government, we trust the local officials, whoever, we trust those in authority to not allow fracking to happen if it's going to be of concern or cause us harm. They wouldn't let us do it. And that whole blind faith thing, I've never partaken of. I research things, I find my own truth. A lot of people take the easy path, which is blind faith, and oh, they're not going to let them do anything. The government's protecting us. It's fine. Well, it's not. It's not fine. I'd like to take a survey of how many people in this community know someone who has cancer now versus 10, 11, 12 years ago before this industry showed up,
What was it like when you first started showing up to these meetings, and were you just asking questions or were you pissed?
I mean, early on, I was alerted of a fracking waste processing facility that was being planned a mile from my town in an industrial park that was jointly owned by the village of Barnesville and the Belmont County Commissioners and the Port Authority. And it was going to be the first of its kind. It's experimental surface dump for the radioactive, chemically laden fracking waste. No liners, no protections. They literally were going to, there's kind of some hills out there, and they were going to fill in the hills and say they were going to make building pads from taking the drill cuttings and the waste from the fracking and mix it with coal ash and other things and just dump it there with no protections. And so I did just started researching, and other folks supported, and that research about the radioactive risks with fracking. So we had enough information at that time regarding the waste that we could, with a lot of effort too, and getting a lot of people involved. First I went to the Barnesville Village Council, even though they were joint owners of the property where they're planning this facility. They had no idea about it. I'm the one that alerted them. And unfortunately, while I was in that first meeting, official meeting that I attended about fracking, about this waste facility, there was a representative there. And before I had a chance to speak, he was there to present the leases for 2 frack pads that were going to be built 500 feet from the shorelines of Slope Creek Reservoir, my reservoir where I lived, to frack, surface mining, fracking, the fracking pads right there by the drinking water supply for like 5 communities in this region. So I came there to talk about the fracking waste processing facility. Like I said, they had no idea about this plan. It was some secret deal that one of the commissioners who was acting as an attorney for this company was in on it, and he had to stop doing that. So we exposed a lot in that situation. But I also addressed the path. And like I said, please don't sign these leases. Please do not sign these leases. That's a horrible idea. How could you do that? I mean, just the fact that they're trucking in chemicals and, diesel fuel could spill. I mean, there's all kinds of even minor things that could occur on a pad that could jeopardize the water, let alone if there was a blowout and all those toxic chemicals and the radioactive waste. It was just a terrible idea. So we also fought those 2 fracking pads and the fracking waste processing facility, or dump, really. It wasn't going to be a facility. It was just going to be a surface landfill, basically, for radioactive waste. And we stopped the pads from being built because I found early on people would rally around, even if they supported the industry, to protect our water, our drinking water. And they also didn't like this waste idea. They didn't want the waste. They want fracking and the financial benefits and potentially some of the few jobs that might be thrown around here or there. But yeah, so we were able to stop those from happening. And so from then on, it's just another facility here, another facility there. Oh, this one's leaking, or someone calls. I mean, it still hasn't ended. All these years, it just comes from one battle to the next, where they're, the irresponsible development. And then you get into the lack of regulations and regulatory capture and
exemptions,
the exemptions and the classification of this radioactive waste, which it is, but in Ohio, it's not classified as radioactive. So it's got the least restrictive rules on fracking waste. And therefore, it's been the dumping ground of choice for the industry. So there's so many issues we could talk about with the waste here. And the fact that in these meetings with the commissioners, village council, I tried to talk to the regulators, like, do you, educate them? And because a lot of them might not know, or they're paid not to know. I don't know. I tried to spread the truth around as much as I could. But I realized early on, where's the science? How can we get data? How can we expose what's really going on here? And I recognized that I could do my part, but I needed backup. And so when a friend of mine who is a professor at Yale contacted me and said, hey, I've seen and know what you're experiencing in Ohio with the oil and gas industry. And when you talk to Dr. Nicole Diesel, they want to do an air and water quality study in Ohio related to fracking, which I helped support them in doing that, 2 of them actually. So I realized we had to get the science. There needed to be more research, and then community science also became a priority because researchers have to follow strict protocols, and the whole peer review process takes years sometimes to get the findings published. And we couldn't count on the regulators. We'd call. There's something's been spilled on the road here, or we think this pad is leaking, or this facility we can see there are problems with it. So we just decided we had to try to start taking our own air sampling, water samples, soil samples, and kind of become the regulators, because they were failing. They would, some folks a whole community had been experiencing negative health impacts, and the regulators weren't calling them back. Ohio EPA, Ohio Department of Natural Resources. So we went out and put air monitors in and collected data, and then they responded. So partly the way I survived, like what I went through and losing my home and all the sacrifices I had to make or was forced to make, helping other people in similar situations became a way that I could deal with the harsh realities of living on the front lines of these toxic industries.
And that kind of comes from, we've talked before, you have this idea of responsibility that kind of comes from the the indigenous wisdom that you kind of studied, and you kind of link it back to that, right?
Well, it's not only it's my full circle, all my heritage. The Quakers, part of their way of life, philosophy, and their code laws of living was stewardship of the land, and of course, that was the indigenous cultures too. So I grew up with that, being a good steward and protecting and taking care of the earth and our resources, and an effort to leave the earth, leave life better for our children. And as soon as this industry arrived, it was like I didn't have a choice. I mean, it was a responsibility to first educate myself and then educate everyone else. Once you find out the truth, it's like I had to share it, and I'm still trying to share it. That's why we're sitting here now. Like, I've been trying for years to get people to understand fracking has to stop. I mean, if you really knew the true cost of oil and gas development in Appalachia and all over the world, if the majority of people knew what it did and what it was, the reality of it, I don't see how it could be happening right now. I don't see how this could continue. So for me, it was a responsibility, not a choice, to preserve, protect, educate, spread the truth. I had to, because it's basically destroying my children's, your children's, everyone's children's future and right to a healthy, happy way of life. Children are dying from cancer, rare forms of cancer clusters, an hour from here, And they're studying, Nicole, I think Nicole has done some studies on other aspects of fracking now and has some data. And I would love to share all of that as we move forward in these podcasts, some of the science that has come forward and some of the data, the research.
Well, let's take a break there. And when we come back, we'll get more into how you and I met and more about kind of what this podcast is going to be about and what people can expect in coming episodes.
Exposure is brought to you by Ohio Valley Allies. To find out more and learn how to take action, please visit ohiovalleyallies.org. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes as we dive deeper into these crucial issues and speak with impacted communities, experts, researchers, and industry insiders. Welcome back. And we left off by talking about community science and the importance of community science in my advocacy work throughout these years. And in part, that was to provide the data to back up what we were experiencing, what we knew as our own personal truth, and the impacts we saw and experienced in health impacts and impacts to the environment. But also, it was a way for me to provide support to those who were also being impacted, whether it was close to home or a little farther away, which is what happened when I was asked by some researchers and scientists I'd been working working with for several years on these community science projects. They asked me to help support them in sampling around East Palestine after the train derailment. And that's how we met, Stuart.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So my wife and I, our two kids, and my father-in-law, we live on a small organic farm in Western Pennsylvania. And we're about 7 miles exactly from where the train derailed in East Palestine. We know a lot of people in East Palestine in that area. I'm not from the area originally, but my wife grew up there, so she kind of knows everybody in the area. It's a small rural part of Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. And when I remember when the controlled burn happened. So like the train derailed, and we're busy. I own a business. I'm a professional luthier, so I build and repair stringed instruments. I've been doing that for close to 20 years. And um, like you, I've kind of lived in different parts of the country. I studied in Michigan, lived out in California to work, and I ended up in Pittsburgh because my family had moved there years ago. So when I wanted to start my own business, that's where I moved because the cost of living and everything. I liked Pittsburgh. Then I met my wife and I moved up to her family farm. And so we're pretty busy people. Like we don't really like stay plugged in all the time. And we had just kind of heard that the train derailed through the grapevine. And so it was something that we were keeping an eye on, but we weren't overly concerned about it because at that time, in the days after the train derailment, there wasn't a whole lot in the news, particularly about how dangerous a lot of the chemicals were that were on the train. Like that was kind of something we learned pretty shortly before they did the control burn. It was like, I kind of remember it as this whirlwind of information that happened mostly from like social media. That was where I was getting most of my news was TikTok, which is sad to me as a 40-year-old who kind of barely understands TikTok. And so we were trying to pay attention to it because it was so close, but we didn't really know to be concerned about it until the day of the controlled burn. My wife reached out to a friend of hers who lives a little closer to just see how she was doing. And she said, oh, we're getting out of here because of what they're about to do. And we were kind of like, what are they about to do?
Right.
And she told us they were going to burn the one train of vinyl chloride. And so we were kind of at that point like a little more concerned. I was watching the wind and everything looked like it was going to go the opposite way of us. Everything we were seeing, it was just that 2-mile radius that they had established. That was like the danger zone. Everyone outside of that didn't have anything to worry about really, according to the information we were getting from, the experts. So we were going about our life maybe a little bit more cautiously than normal, but the night that they did the control burn, I was working in my shop on the farm, and I walked outside around 5:30 or so. I think they did the control burn around 3 or 3:30, and there were these big, black, ominous, what I thought were storm clouds hanging over the valley that our farm is in. And I remember them because they were odd. They just kind of sat there. They didn't really move a lot. And they were just sort of hanging there really low. But I thought, well, we're well outside the 2-mile radius. Maybe this is just an odd weather event triggered by that. So I went into dinner. And then while I was sitting at the dinner table around 7, my neighbor, who's a dairy farmer, 6th-generation dairy farmer, texted me and he said, hey, what's it like on your farm? Because we're kind of lower in the valley than him. And I went outside, I opened the front door and was just immediately hit in the face with this thick, pungent wall of chlorination, the smell of chlorine. And I closed the door. And the rest of that night, we were kind of panicked because we had a baby girl, less than a year old. We had our boy, and we live in a 200-year-old drafty farmhouse. And I didn't know what to do as a father. I didn't know if it was safer to stay in the house or to try to get us out. I was worried about what kind of exposure we would have just getting from the door to the truck.
Yep.
And then once we were in the truck, how long did we have to drive to get out of it, and what direction? And so I called the EPA, and I still remember the phone call. It was like, I don't remember if this was the EPA or the DEP. I called one before the other, But whoever I called first were more surprised by the fact that I was smelling it that far away than they were concerned about my safety or what we should do. And they had no information about like what was best for us to do. He basically told me it was up to me. If I was concerned, I should leave, and and then I called the EPA. They were no more helpful, and so I was on Facebook trying to get information from whoever I could, and everyone in my area was in the same boat. I mean, some of the farmers that we knew that were closer, their eyes were burning, the backs of their throats were itching. But every time we called somebody, we were kind of just told like, it shouldn't come that far. You're probably fine. And so in the weeks after, we were concerned about what we had been exposed to. We got through the night, and the next morning it was cleared up, but the concerns stayed, and we were looking for resources, and there just was none. There was no one that was really. It took weeks for the DEP to even send anyone out to our area to interview people. And so in that process of trying to get answers, a friend of my wife's from high school said we should contact this lady, Jill Hunkler. And so we reached out to you, and within, I want to say, less than a week, you were out at our farm with a scientist, with soil samples, water samples. You took probably half a dozen samples from our farm, and it was really appreciated in that moment that somebody was able to, in a moment like that where there were so many questions and so little answer, come and actually give us something that was scientific and empirical and could help us understand if there was an issue on our farm or our water. Because I mean, we drink out of the spring on our farm, so it's a really big deal to us if anything is contaminated, not to mention the food and the crops and all that stuff. And then we just hit it off in the driveway. I mean, you guys were kind of getting ready to leave, packing up your gear, and we were talking about all kinds of things. And I think there was a recognition that there was some kindred spirit sort of vibe there. And I kept in touch with you. We kept talking. And the more that I learned about your work, the more I wanted to be involved with it. And so that's kind of how we met, was through that community science aspect of what you do.
So for me to be able to provide any type of comfort or relief for people, and the science was a privilege, but also another way, like I said, that I can deal with any of these harsh realities is by trying to support and help and educate and uplift. And science is education. It's the best. You shouldn't be able to argue with it, although some folks try to deny it,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then there's so much to go into. And I met, probably 20 families, community members out there. So there's a lot we could dive into about that whole disaster. And just to be clear, that's a plastic disaster, and plastic comes from fracking, and that's one of those truths that people still don't know. What has happened here with us, the fact that we've created this together, that's because there was a horrible train disaster, but that brought us together. And we could have allowed that connection to just be for a few weeks, or we met, do some testing, and then go away. But there was something there that we decided to honor. And so it was a gift. I'm so grateful to have your support and to be able to, be sitting here now, So there's hope right there. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, out of these tragedies, something good can come, and usually always does. in some way, shape, or form. And so that's what this podcast has to be about, right?
Yes. As I've gotten to know you, and I've always been, I've always paid attention to these issues, and I've been I've always been very connected with nature. I've always loved hiking and camping, and I'm an outdoors person. On the farm, we kind of interact with nature every day. So I consider myself to be somewhat more keyed in than a lot of people. But since I met you and I've started to learn more about the work that you do, I've been blown away at the things that I've learned. And not just from you, but the network of people that you are connected with and that you work with as well, because there's a lot of people out there, and that's something I've learned too. There's a lot of people out there who are working very hard in very serious ways on these issues. And so I want to expose the true costs, the full costs of these industries, not just from the perspective of the environment, but also from the perspective of human health, from the perspective of subsidies and tax credits, and all of the different ways that we are all unknowingly supporting these industries. And I think you've said it before, if people really did know the truth, and if these industries had to really pay the true cost for themselves rather than externalizing the cost on everyone else, I think that we would be talking about this a lot less.
And it would be disappearing at a way quicker rate than it is. And it's not actually disappearing. Last night proved it. I mean, it's picking up here again. And so what we're talking about is just as relevant, most likely more than it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really relevant too, because there's other industries that are coming down the pike that are following the same model and that have some of the same potential for damage. So I think what people can expect in upcoming episodes is we're going to be interviewing experts in environmental law, science, policy. We're going to expose corruption, and like you said, we're also going to look at kind of the silver lining of things, and because there's opportunity everywhere, and even in really bad situations, you got to be able to find the opportunity and move in that direction, move towards the light.
It's so true. And that is the main goal for me, is to try to reach everyone respectfully, in a peaceful way. Like, I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm not trying to take away someone's job. If we're going to take away the fracking jobs, then I'm trying to and have been advocating for worker rights and exposing the harms. They are really the number one frontline victims of this industry. They're exposed the most, more than anybody, are their oil and gas workers.
Mm-hmm.
So for years, I've been working with Justin Noble. His new book is Petroleum 238, which dives into radioactive risks and threats of fracking waste, but also details a lot about worker exposures. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm trying to present the truth in a way that it doesn't matter what you believe, if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or whatever you are, whoever you are. I want to try to find a way to reach you and bring us together in the truth of, we have to find a better way. This is not working. This is not working. This is a terrible path to be this far down, and it's time to shift and move in a better way, in a safer way, in a way that will uplift, sustain, and support life on this planet for our children. It's that simple. So here we are, potentially at the closing of this first episode of Exposure. And I'm finding I'm struggling again. And this time with how to let folks know what to expect and what we want to highlight and what truths are we going to expose. And there's a lot. There's so much to share about what has led me to this point. And there's so many issues with the radioactive waste and injection wells, and how for 8 years now, we've been fighting PTTG cracker plant. So we have to go into exposing the connection between fracking and cracking to make plastic. That has to be. And so plastic, you could go on forever about all the new studies about the terrible impacts and on health and the environment. So we just got to take it one step at a time and slowly uncover what we've found and bring in the experts that can support, what we've experienced and know to be true. But I want to make the point again that through the harsh realities and truths, we find motivation, inspiration, and upliftment somehow, some way. And we always kind of do, it manifests,
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
And as Bob Marley's mom used to say to me, guidance and protection.
Hakuna Matata.